She is a well-known scholar for her research works on interface of Islam and Indic religions. Her interests include the religion and cultural history of the Mughal Empire, Islamic mysticism, the early modern and modern translations of Indic texts into Persian and modern Hindu thought, from St. Stephen to SOAS and then to Harvard for her PhD. She also visited for study purpose Iran and Syria before earning her doctorate. Her research has been supported by grants from the Fulbright and other foundations. Um, Her initial work, the study of various translations of Ramayana and Indic scriptures. In the same course, my first interaction with her goes back to 2001 or 2 during a study of Ramayana's Persian translations. Later in Iran, she visited Farangistan and still remember her meeting with Iranian Indologists, especially Professor Mustabai and Professor Haddad Adil, who was president of the Farangistan at that time too. Her recent work on Darashikoh brings more dimensions, especially in modern times when more and more dimensions of Darashikoh as a prince or as a person who brought forward Indic texts are with the various debates. Today, her lecture is on Jahangir and her dialogue in the court of Jahangir. I hope, apart from other sources, Majalis Jahangiri is one of the sources she will speak on. We are also happy to welcome Dr. Raghavan, a career diplomat heading Indian Council for World Affairs, who has worked on elite nobility of Mughals and their contribution
हाँ कर रहा हूँ.
to various facets of culture and literature. His works include his PhD thesis on Abdul Rahim Khan Khanan. We also welcome our President Janab Shahid Mehdi Sahib, Khaja Piri Sahib, who brought variety
हाँ
of the
कर रहा हूँ.
sources of Persian literature in the form of manuscripts, asnad, and other
इस
artifacts
टाइम वेटिंग
in
में
Noor
एक ऐसे.
Microfilm Center. Janab Aghay Rabbani, cultural counselor, Iran Culture House, New Delhi, and many others who have joined today in this lecture. With these brief words, I again welcome all and I request Madam Safi to continue with the speaker of today's lecture. Thanks a lot and welcome again.
Thank you, Professor Chandrasekhar. And before we come to Professor Gandhi's lecture, which all of us are waiting for very eagerly, I invite Professor S.B.F. Hussaini, who is the secretary of the society, to give a short introduction of Professor Amir Hassan Abidi Memorial Society. And after that, we come to the lecture. Bilqis Bhabi?
She has to unmute.
You unmute her from here.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hastikili de dare ganje hakim. Dear Dr. Gandhi, Dr. Raghavan, Dr. Rabbani, Dr. Piri, members of the Memorial Society and colleagues, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this annual event of the Professor S.A.H.Abidi Memorial Society. This society is a registered learned society created in fond memory of Professor Abidi, an eminent Persian scholar who was associated with Department of Persian, University of Delhi for several decades. The aim of this society is the promotion of Persian language, literature, and Indo-Persian culture in India. Our website, www.profabidimemorial.com, provides details of our activities and past lectures. During the short period of 5 years, this society is in existence. We have organized 5 lectures and published 2 volumes of articles of Professor Abidi, which were left unfinished and later completed with the help of his colleagues and students. We still have a large collection of his notebooks, files, and loose papers, which have been catalogued for use by future generation of researchers. We hope to publish more volumes at regular intervals. So far, 3 postgraduate students have been awarded a scholarship to pursue their education at the University of Delhi. I am also delighted to inform you that this society has scheduled an international conference on Indo-Persian literature and culture on 27th and 26th and 27th of February 2021 to commemorate the centenary of Professor Abidi's birth. In association with Department of Persian of the University of Delhi, 15 academics from leading universities of the world have accepted our invitation to present papers. More details are available at our website, where interested persons can register to participate in the proceedings. We hope to widen the scope of the society with the help of the members and well-wishers in the years to come and keep alive the heritage of Professor Abidi. Thank you all. ببخشید من 2 دقیقه دیگه میگیرم برای اینکه به فارسی هم بگویم. با سلام و ارادت نخبگان محترم دکتر گاندی، دکتر راگوان، دکتر علی ربانی، دکتر خواجه پیری، اعضای انجمن و همکاران و شرکت کنندگان را خوش آمد میگویم. خیر مقدمه. 5 سال پیش این انجمن در یادبود شادروان پروفسور آبدی تأسیس شد که استاد برجسته دانشگاه دهلی بود. ما به زبان اردو بابای فارسی بگوییم چون در سراسر هند تخمریزی شناخت زبان و فرهنگ هند و ایران کرد و چندین جلد تاریخ ادبیات هند و ایران را به توسط دانشجویان دکترا تهیه نمود. ما وبسایت به نام www.proofabidimemorial.com داریم که تمام تفصیلات اونجا داده شده. 3 دانشجویان دکترا را بورسیه دادیم و 2 جلد کتاب مقالات عابدی به توسط انجمن به چاپ رسید و همینطور کار ادامه دارد و انشالله در سال آینده در ماه فوریه به تاریخ 26 و 27 به تاریخ 26 و 27 فوریه 2021 میلادی با همکاری دانشگاه دهلی در یادبود 100 ساله تولد مرحوم عابدی گذار میکنیم. هر کی میخواد در این توسط وبسایت نام کند. امیدواریم که دیگری خواهند کرد. خیلی ممنون. سپاسگزار همه شما و خیر مقدم همه شما.
Thank you, Professor Hussaini. And I now invite Professor Gandhi to start her screen sharing. The topic today, as has already been told to you by Professor Chandrasekhar, is Sitting with the Emperor, Dialogue and Assembly in Jahangir's Court. This lecture explores Jahangir's dialogues and assemblies, the encounters themselves, as well as the visual and literary representation. It also investigates what lectures we might derive today from his example of imperial hospitality. Professor Gandhi, the floor is yours now.
Please unmute. Yeah.
Yes. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clear.
Thank you. So, dear Suhail Abidi Saab, Rana Safri ji, other members of Professor Abidi's family, Shahid Mehdi Saab, Dr. Rabbani, Dr. Khwaja Piri, Dr. Chandrasekhar, Dr. Raghavan, Dr. Hussaini, and distinguished guests. I'm most honored to be delivering the Sayyid Amir Hassan Abidi Memorial Lecture today. On this day, and in the difficult times in which we live, I believe it is fitting to remember India's pluralistic traditions, traditions that Professor Abadi upheld through his work and that others present here carry on in the present day. Professor Abadi was a remarkable institution in himself. His numerous articles and several editions of primary texts attest to his vast contribution to the field of Indo-Persian studies. When embarking on my own studies in this area as a young college student in Delhi, I remember coming across his writings, and I also recall seeing him once in Iran House. Later on, I very profitably benefited from his several editions of Indo-Persian texts in my own research. I turn to them time and again and refer my students to them. In fact, it would take a scholar several lifetimes to fully study, deeply study all the editions of texts that he has produced. I was also recently very happy to learn from my father that when he studied at St. Stephen's College in the early 1950s, Professor Abadi was a faculty member there. As this occasion is being co-hosted by Iran House, I must also express my gratitude to Dr. Rabbani and to Dr. Khoja Piri, whom I've also known for many years, who has been instrumental in making Iran House an absolute treasure house of Persian learning in Delhi. When inviting me to present this lecture, Rana Safviji suggested that I present on the Mughal Emperor Jahangir's engagement with Vedanta. Professor Abadi had written a valuable article examining Jahangir's encounter with the Hindu ascetic Chidrup, who's also known as Jadrup because of how his name was written in the Persian sources. This article also has several illuminating details of farmans that Jahangir issued to Hindu temples and religious authorities. Professor Abadi had also edited, along with Professor Tarachand, the Jog Bashist, which is a translation of the Laghu Yoga Vasishtha prepared for Jahangir when he was a prince, known as Prince Salim. This edition is a wonderful gift to scholars studying the interface between Sanskrit and Persian and Indic and Islamic traditions. However, when I turned to the accounts and paintings of Jahangir's meetings with Chidrup, I thought that I would broaden the topic and use these encounters as a lens to examine the theme of dialogue more generally. Although the motifs of dialogue and conversation had long had a place in the Mughal court, under Jahangir, they form especially vivid themes in both art and in writing, as well as in the emperor's own practices. Jahangir himself was known for seeking out conversation partners and holding assemblies with a diverse group of visitors to the Mughal court, including men from Central Asia, Iran, and Europe, as well as Indians of various religious persuasions. He would sometimes note accounts of these dialogues and conversations in his journal or have them depicted in visual form as paintings. Or sometimes his visitors themselves would record these meetings. I'm going to start with a famous painting that Jahangir commissioned of his dialogues with Chidrup. This is the one that's used in the poster for this event. And I'm saying this, with sort of full knowledge that there are some distinguished art historians whom I've seen in the audience here. And let me also sort of add a caveat that I do discuss Jahangir and Jahangir's era in my book on Dara Shukor, my own research focus has been in on a slightly later area, as well as my current work. But I have indeed looked at the theme of dialogue, and I think the motif of dialogue in Mughal painting, as well as the literary structure of a dialogue, is still a lens that has a lot more going for it. It is one, I think, that invites more investigation and exploration. So finally, I'm going to use these examples of dialogue that I'm going to present here to reflect on what lessons we can draw from them in the present day. Okay. I'm just going to try to see how to move on to the next slide because currently it is not allowing me to do that.
You are the co-host, so it should let you do it.
You can share the screen. By sharing the screen, you can show the slide, Supriya.
Yes, no, so I have shared the screen. I
Yeah,
have shared the
Radha,
screen. This first slide
now
is
on the screen, sharing the screen, you switch on the slide which you are trying to show there.
yes, this is the problem. So unfortunately, it is not moving to the next slide. Just
I think you should take cursor on that slide and switch on that slide.
yes, for some reason it is just frozen up and it is not allowing me to do so.
Yeah, Supriya, just do one thing. You put off your PowerPoint and then share again.
Yes, I'm just going to try to do that. And in fact, I might disappear for a minute.
Yeah, yeah.
That's okay.
Huh. It's, huh. Yes. 1 second. So sorry about this. I just need a minute to investigate.
Don't worry. As somebody has said in the audience, we'll be waiting for you.
Okay. Okay, so I think I need to be made the co-host again.
Okay, I'll do that.
Just one second. Okay, I hope it will continue to work now. Huh.
The image is visible.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so this is a famous painting that Jahangir commissioned of his dialogues with Chidrup. It's the most famous one. There's also another one located in Australia, which has been slightly painted over. Now this painting, as you can see, has two distinct parts. The bottom half is crowded with portraits of several members of Jahangir's retinue, in the midst of which is the emperor's riderless horse. The top half has more open space. It separates the bustle below from the contemplative exchange above. Here, Jahangir sits facing Chidrup in an archway forming the entrance to the sannyasi's cave. The emperor on the left is sort of larger in size and bejeweled, wearing a halo representing kingship's radiant glory, or far in Persian. But he sits in a deferential posture with his feet tucked under him at the same level as the ascetic. Indeed, a Mughal emperor was hardly ever portrayed sitting alongside someone else unless he happened to be a holy man. In Jahangir's case, though, there are a few other cases where he is portrayed sitting at the same level as others. Chidrup, with a shaved head and clad only in a loincloth, gesticulates while speaking. In the far left, the domes and gates of a city emerge faintly from the horizon. Now, this painting commemorates an actual event that took place in Mandu in February 1617. I just also want to add that Kavita Singh, who I believe is present here, has also suggested that this anticipates, the structure of this painting anticipates the later Darbar scenes that one has, especially in Shah Jahan's time, where you have the emperor on top with the sort of jharoka window, and then below you have a range of courtiers. Now, at this time, the time of this event, the emperor decided to visit Chidrup, a Hindu holy man who lived near the ancient pilgrimage town of Ujjain. Jahangir had heard of Chidrup from his father Akbar and had desired to meet him for a while, but hesitated to call him over to the court in Agra. It would have been too much trouble to expect from the ascetic, who was getting on in years, and besides, there was always the danger that he would rebuff the emperor. And indeed, there has been a history of holy men rebuffing sort of sultans or badshahs. People who had truly renounced the world often did not pay heed to those with power and wealth. The emperor halted a short distance from Ujjain at a garden palace which had been constructed in the 15th century for the Sultan of Mandu before Akbar had annexed the kingdom. From here, Jahangir took a boat to visit the ascetic. After disembarking, he made the last part of the journey on foot out of respect for the holy man. Jahangir would also travel on foot to the Dargah in Ajmer, for instance. With a keen eye for detail, Jahangir records the astonishingly tiny dimensions of the hollow set into a hillside in which Chidrup lived. He spent over 2 hours with the ascetic, noting the fine points of Chidrup's austere habits in food and clothing. Now, the two likely conversed in Hindavi, and in the emperor's own account, they seemed to enjoy each other's company. Jahangir describes Chidrup as being occupied in worship of the divine reality, hakikat, which immediately places the ascetic as a monotheist and not an idolater. The emperor reports that Chidrup was well versed in the science of Vedanta, ilme Vedant. He explains to his reader that this is the same as ilme tasawwuf, or the science of tasawwuf. So here Jahangir probably means that Chidrup believed in an ultimate reality that at some level was identical with the individual's soul. This is an idea familiar to those steeped in Sufi metaphysics. In a later account of the exchange, Jahangir's close courtier, Motamed Khan, elaborates that Chidrup equated, and quote, equated the vocabulary of the tasawwuf of the people with the way of his own tasawwuf, end quote. مصطلحات tasawwuf اهل اسلام را به طریق tasawwuf خود تطبیق داشته. So that is to say, the ascetic explained concepts from his own tradition by likening them to the Islamic mystical ideas with which Jahangir was conversant. Motamed Khan also remarks that, quote, these days the science of Vedanta, ilm Vedanta, is taken to mean tasawwuf, end quote, suggesting that this equivalence was for him a fairly new concept, though less so for Jahangir. Nevertheless, such efforts to draw these equivalences filtered away the clouded waters of difference and allowed Chidrup and Jahangir to find common ground. The following year, Jahangir reports more meetings with Chidrup, including meetings in Mathura, where the ascetic had moved from Ujjain. Jahangir's diary entries record his delight in Chidrup's lofty words and his marvel at the ascetic's abstemious habits. Other chroniclers, though, hint that Chidrup was roped into playing this time a more political role. So Motamed Khan, the chronicler from Jahangir's court, reports that Khan-e-Azam Koka, who was both the late Emperor Akbar's foster brother and the father-in-law of Jahangir's eldest son Khusro, paid a visitor to the ascetic with an agenda in mind. Now, Khusro had been in Jahangir's bad books for a long time. He had rebelled against his father in 1606, and after that he'd been blinded and kept under arrest. So here the effort is to get Chidrup to intervene, to lessen the punishment on Khusro. So Prince Khusro had been imprisoned for too long, Khan-e-Azam told Chidrup. Would the ascetic persuade Jahangir to release his son? In Motamed Khan's account, Khan-e-Azam apparently had to overcome his own religious bigotry, or as he puts it, S.A.H.Abidi Dori, to approach Chidrup. So he was reluctant, but then he felt that maybe this would be a good way to achieve his ends. The ascetic complied and successfully convinced the emperor to feel sympathy for his son. The emperor, according to Motamed Khan, quote, washed the marks of that ignorant dimwit's crimes with the pure water of forgiveness, end quote. Jahangir's next diary entry, mentioning his meeting with the sage, announced that he has now decided to pardon his son Khusro and free him from prison. So we can see here Chidrup's important role as an advisor and a counselor to Jahangir, and also that Jahangir was willing to reconsider his own decisions, even in crucial matters of family and sovereignty. I do note that there is also a similar painting depicting Akbar's visit to Chidrup. And this was actually produced during Jahangir's time, where Chidrup was elevated as an exemplary ascetic and incorporated into artistic and literary productions. It's not a coincidence that also during this period, there's an interest at the court in translating Indic texts that were structured around the narrative frame of a dialogue. Now, these iconic images that we've just seen are themselves part of a much older visual and literary conversation. The motif of dialogue and the narrative form, structure of dialogue have antecedents in Indic tradition as well as in early Islamic and Timurid traditions. The Sanskrit term samvada, which literally means speaking together, can take many forms. It has in its literary instances. A samvada can be polemical, aiming to refute the opponent's views, or in contrast, it can show harmony. Early instances of the samvada can be found in the Rig Veda and of course in the Upanishads, which sometimes assume a dialogical structure. The samvada has also been used as a literary device in several Buddhist, Jain, Nath, and Sikh texts. Its protagonists range from rulers to sages to gods and other religious figures. Now, the dialogical form also appears in several Islamic works, including the report of a dialogue that Imam Jafar as-Sadiq had with a Hindu. Here too, dialogue can serve various purposes, ranging from pedagogy to polemic. But there are some even more direct precursors to Jahangir's meeting with Chidrup and the textual and visual representations of these events. Now, the topos, so the sort of the visual, the motif of a ruler in dialogue with a holy man, appears in 14th century Ilkhan Mongol Shahnameh illustrations, and in India in several earlier Mughal paintings produced at the court of Akbar, who reigned from 1555 to 1605. Now here I would like to credit Michael Barry, who pointed out that one of the archetypes for the Mughal depictions of royalty encountering ascetics is this painting on the right here by Mir Musawwir, his painting of Alexander the Great, or Iskandar, meeting a hermit in the forest. And this painting, sorry, there's no place here for me to put the label, it's not, but this image illustrates a Hirati manuscript from roughly 1494 to 5 of the Khamseh of the poet Nizami, the quintet of the famous Persian poet Nizami, that eventually made its way into the Mughal library. So this is Alexander as imagined in Persian literature. So he's a historical figure, but he is also this, a figure of literature over here, who's portrayed as a world conqueror, but also as an enlightened philosopher ruler. And this representation became highly influential at the Mughal court and seems to be very important during the reign of Jahangir and, as I argue, also for Dara Shikoh as well. So Jahangir, as we know, was very well acquainted with Nizami's Sikandar-Nama or Iskandar-Name, his epic on Alexander, which is divided into two parts. There's the Sharaf-Name, or the Book of Honor, describing Alexander's conquests, and the Iqbal-Name, or Book of Fortune, which is also called the Khirad-Name, or the Book of Wisdom. And this describes Alexander as a truth seeker discoursing with philosophers. And we know this because Jahangir often quotes from the Iskandar-Name in his memoirs. We also know that Jahangir had in his collection a splendid copy of Amir Khusro's response to Nizami's Iskandar-Name, which is also called the Aine Iskandari, or the Alexandrine Mirror. Now, according to Michael Barry, Musawwir's painting here on the right, and those of its genre, contain several allegorical components, which include a stream that symbolizes the font of life. We have Alexander, who also goes in search of the water of life, the font of life. A riderless horse representing the carnal soul that the emperor has abandoned. So you can see the horse that's tethered at the bottom, a couple of horses here. I have seen often in other instances in Mughal painting where you have a death portrait, for instance, and then there is a riderless horse, sort of again symbolizing the body, the sort of the finite, sort of the temporal body. And a cave, which carries multiple connotations in Islamic traditions as a locus of spiritual enlightenment and wisdom. Another convention of this archetype, where the sage meets a ruler or is seen not in this painting on the right, but in the one on the left of Jahangir and Chidrup. You see very faintly, there is a city in the background. So often there's this contrast drawn between the Palatine city, the worldly, the realm of the material world that the ruler has temporarily left behind, and then goes to the forest to meet the hermit. Now, I do want to sort of also add that I believe Mughal paintings to be multivalent, redolent with a whole range of meaning. So it's not as though there's necessarily kind of one correct code, but I do find these points that Michael Barry has made to be quite useful in identifying the components of this very commonly encountered genre in the 17th century. In Mughal painting. Now, During Akbar's reign, Mughal painters dynamically interpreted this motif of Alexander receiving wisdom either from the philosopher Plato or from another hermit. So here is another example from a Khamse manuscript that it's a 16th century manuscript that also was in the Mughal library, and it's now present in Kolkata. So this is also, as you can see, Alexander meeting a hermit in a forest setting. Now, this other folio from a dispersed Sharafname, which is the first book of Alexander's romance produced under Akbar's reign. So this provides an impressive example of how the emperor is grafted onto the figure of Alexander. So if you see over here, this figure somewhat resembles Akbar, and one sees that in the artistic productions of Akbar's time often, where you have Rama resembling Akbar, and here it's Alexander who somewhat resembles Akbar. And you can see sort of an index sort of looking ascetic in the foreground over here. So there are very overt ways in which Mughal rulers identified themselves with Alexander. He was not the only model of kingship, but he was definitely a significant one. But in Akbar's case, over time, Akbar takes on the persona of the semi-divine mythic figure without a need to associate himself with the spiritual authority of others. So here's an example. This is a neem kalam, or a tinted drawing by the artist Miskin. And you can see the emperor, he's seated here, and he is observing an animal fight, and he's seated by the stream. Deep in the middle of the forest. He inhabits the space which in the broader sort of Mughal and Persianate visual tradition signifies the abode of a hermit. And he's watching this animal fight, and his attendants are kind of standing here watching below. And you see at the bottom, there is this row of sannyasis, and this detail is sort of blown up over here on the right. So they're just seated in repose in meditation. They're almost like a fixture of the landscape. And what we see, and Akbar here, he's not going to them to seek guidance, but it's his benevolent presence that allows them to exist undisturbed. This image of Akbar in an Indian landscape asserts his dominion over the flora, fauna, and peoples of India, but it also shows him in tune with the kingdom's animal and human inhabitants, somewhat like a parent overseeing his family's well-being. So as we can see, this theme of natural balance, and this is a very important theme in the akhlaq contexts, in the kind of sort of ethical, moral, political works that undergirded ideas of sovereignty at this time, that this theme of natural balance also comes to be important for the representations of Jahangir's rule also. But the more immediate precursors to this painting of Jahangir with Chidrup lie in a group of manuscripts produced for Prince Salim in Allahabad. This is the fort in Allahabad, where Salim lived for a few years in the early 1600s when he was rebelling against his father. And quite remarkably, he had workshops, artistic workshops going, and a whole range of manuscripts produced at this time. And this is a period that for me also anticipates the 1650s, when Dara Shukla was in Delhi, and he was a patron to all kinds of productions of Indic works. So it wasn't a completely sort of unheard of thing for a Mughal prince to do. So there's this staggering range of manuscripts that were produced for him, and these are some examples. There's the Divan of Amir Hassan Dehlavi. There is the Jog Bashist, which is a translation of the abridged Yoga Vasishtha. And this actually, I'll come to that in a bit, because there is more than one Jog Bashist that is associated with Salim. There's the Rajkumar, which is a translation of the Sufi romance Mrigavati. There's the Anwar Sohaili, a translation of the Arabic Kalila wa Dimna, and the Dvadasa Bhava, like the 12 existences. And this is a translation of an Indic text. It hasn't been determined exactly what, featuring characters known as Vikramanka, a ruler, and a prince Mriganka, and that's been dispersed. And a treatise on yoga, the Bahrul Hayat, which was produced by the Sufi master Muhammad Ghaus Gwaliori. And these manuscripts share similar characteristics and appear to have been produced in the same workshop. Now, apart from Amir Hassan's Diwan, all these works engage directly with Indic text and traditions. So they represent cultural dialogue and encounter in a general sense. But more significantly, many of these are replete with the motif of a king or a prince meeting an ascetic, or they engage more broadly with this theme of spiritual liberation for a ruler. And nowhere is this more prominent, than the Jog-Vashist. Now, this is a Persian rendition of an abridgment of the Yoga Vasishtha. The Yoga Vasishtha itself is built upon an earlier text called the Mokshopai. And then the Kashmiri Pandit Abhinanda, sort of sometime in the medieval period, abridged the Yoga Vasishtha, producing the Laghu Yoga Vasishtha, or the shorter Yoga Vasishtha. And this was the basis that was used for a lot of the Mughal renditions of it. So it overlays Vedanta, a Vedantic lens on this frame of, it sort of combines a frame of both Ram devotion as well as Vedanta, and it depicts the legendary divine king Rama while he was a prince. Now, Ram wanted to withdraw from the world. He felt a sense of vairagya or dispassionment from the world. He wanted to abandon the throne or possible rulership and withdraw. And then his guru Vasisht led him on a journey of liberation by telling him a series of stories, and each story leads to another story, and so on, until he actually achieves liberation in this world. So Jivan Mukti, this is a kind of living liberation. So he doesn't have to wait for the next world to be liberated. He can be liberated, and he can also be a ruler. So you can imagine why this is a kind of text that would have really greatly appealed to Mughal rulers, as well as a whole range of other rulers in India, including Sultan Zainul Abidin of Kashmir. So there were many Jog-Vashist renditions produced during that era. Now, we've already heard of the Yoga Vasishtha translation that was made for Jahangir, edited by Professor Abidi. Now, and that is actually a different one. This was produced by a team of scholars, including Nizam Panipati, and as well as two renowned Pandits, and it was made explicitly for Prince Salim. And in fact, they praise his spiritual inclinations in the introduction to that. Normally we hear of Jahangir and Salim's, his love of wine and his kind of love of worldly pleasures. But here, these people praised his interest in spirituality even while he was a prince. But this Jog Vasisht, which was evidently also produced at the workshop in Allahabad, is a bit puzzling because, as Heike Franke has pointed out, this text includes a dedication to Salim's father, Akbar. But it does seem to have been produced in conjunction with the other manuscripts that were also produced at Allahabad while Salim was in rebellion. And one could speculate that perhaps it was produced when he was trying to make amends with his father. Again, his rebellion was a little understated at that point. But nevertheless, Jahangir retained a fondness for this work, and it's been said to be the oldest manuscript ever that survives of a Yoga Vasishtha rendition. And later, when he became the emperor, he penned in his distinctive handwriting that you see in this marginal note, he penned this inscription on its frontispiece. And there's some wormholes, so it's not entirely fully legible. But here he describes this work as stories from the ancients, the Hikayat-e Mutaqaddimin, And he says that he brought about this translation from Hindi when he was a prince in his 20s. And then he adds, he says, "Begoyet kitabe khobi ist agar che kesi be goosh khush beshenaved." So it's a most excellent book if one were to listen to it with an alert mind. So we can see how he did retain an attachment to this text. And there's another note revealing the identity of the translator, Farmuli, who translated this work by imperial order in order that those Persian knowing people, Farsi-Zaban, who didn't know Sanskrit could benefit from it. So let me draw your attention to a couple of paintings from this manuscript. So already we've seen how the frame of dialogue is so important here. It structures this work. And this is a work that comes to be crucial for Dara Shikoh and also for Jahangir as well. So look at this slide here. There's King Suraghu who visits the sage Mandavya. Again, this is a king who is disillusioned. He has some kind of searing questions that are bothering him, and he goes to visit and take advice from the sage. And you see the resemblance here between this depiction and the depiction of Jahangir and Chidrup. Here, of course, there's Chidrup's kind of little dwelling, the hole over here, whereas, you have the ascetic's hut, but, similar visual characteristics. And indeed, there's a resemblance between Vasisht and, the sage Mandavya and Chidrup over here. And so this is another image where Shiva and Parvati are meeting Vasisht. And you can see a resemblance between Vasisht and Chidrup in the way that they're portrayed, as well as in the other elements of this painting. We don't have a riderless horse here, but we have Shiva's bull Nandi. And we have these other attendants down below guarding it. So the pairing of ruler and ascetic here and the strong resemblances between Chidrup and the sages portrayed in the Jog Vasisht add a whole new layer of resonances to the depiction of Jahangir and Chidrup. Now, we can also see this theme in the Dvadasa Bhava. Now, unfortunately, this text was sold in 1972 and it was intact then, but then it was dispersed and sold to different collectors. So it's hard to reconstruct more details about it. Perhaps there are some others who are working on this. But I wanted to point out that this painting also, it shows this figure of Mrigank, who was dressed in ascetic's robes over here, and he's meeting a king. And if you look carefully, this king somewhat resembles Jahangir, also resemblance to Akbar as well. And he is seated in a half lotus posture. And we actually have there are a few paintings of Jahangir where he is also seated in this half lotus posture, and we'll see one of them later on. And from what I can make out of the text, there is something to do with Mrigank being in disguise, wanting to marry the daughter of a king, and so on. So again, there are themes of asceticism, there are themes of kingship that run through this work, but it's hard to determine its exact source without having access to the full manuscript. It could possibly be about the King Vikramaditya. But at any rate, it points to Jahangir's interest in establishing links not only with divine rulers like Rama, but also celebrated Indian rulers and ascetics as well. Now, as a young prince, Salim kept up his father's practice of maintaining ties with leading Sufis, particularly those belonging to the Chishti order. But there are other ways in which he portrayed his own encounters with and reverence for ascetics. And I'd like to highlight this painting, which probably dates from Akbar's reign, that seems to depict Prince Salim visiting an ascetic in the wilderness. Now, Ebba Koch has written about it, and she has pointed out that this figure evokes the character of Majnun, who also was supposed to have a kind of sway over animals. And if you notice here, and this is something you see in pictures of Jahangir when he becomes an emperor, that you have the coexistence of wild and tame animals. You have sort of the tame animals here and wild animals, and they're all sort of sitting quite peacefully in the wilderness. And we have Salim, who's in a very earnest and fairly deferential posture, and he is sitting with this ascetic who also evokes Khizr, because of his green clothing. And they do seem to me, my mind, there are also resonances here with the motif of Alexander visiting a sage also. So here we have, the prince as earnest seeker. That's something that we've seen in a lot of these other representations. But there is also another representation of Jahangir, where he actually adopts the persona of a charismatic Sufi pir. Now, in 1614, publicly displaying his veneration of the Chishtis, Jahangir visited Moinuddin Chishti's tomb at Ajmer, and he bared lavish gifts. And during his visit, he fell ill, and only after praying at the saint's tomb did he recover. After his recovery, he pierced his ears, and he wore pearl drops in them. And piercing the ears is actually a symbol of sort of bandagi. It's a symbol of sort of bondage or servitude in relationship to the Sufi master. So this gesture was then adopted by several noblemen in his court. And so we can see here that there is a kind of slippage, that we have Jahangir who is showing his devotion to the Sufi pir. But then we have his noblemen sort of and this was seen in Akbar's court also, and they call themselves the emperor's murid or disciples. So when they pierce their ears, it is actually following the emperor. So there's a way in which he adopts the persona of a Sufi pir. Now, his appropriation of the status of a Sufi master is relevant to two works that record Jahangir's conversations with their authors, as well as with a diverse group of courtiers and visiting travelers and scholars he hosted at his court. And as Dr. Chandrasekhar hoped, so I do have a little bit on the Majalis-e Jahangiri, which is a text fairly recently discovered and edited. And this is an account of nighttime assemblies or majlises, majalis, held during the years 1608 to 1611. The author is Jahangir's courtier Abdul Sattar Lahori, who was charged with also preparing detailed studies of Christian doctrine. And he recorded these assemblies in close conjunction with Jahangir, who would sometimes ask him to record, such and such thing or in a certain way. Now, the other work is much briefer. And it's a series of conversations recorded by Mutribi Samarkandi, who was a visitor from Central Asia who met Jahangir in 1626. And this is just shortly before Jahangir died. Now, both these works invoke the genre of the Malfuzat literature, which records the sayings of Sufi saints as reported by their disciples. So indeed, Lahori very explicitly draws on the Fawaidul Fu'ad, which is a report of the sayings of the revered Nizamuddin Aulia by his disciple Hasan Sijzi. And both these works treat Jahangir as a font of mystical knowledge. And the topics that they deal with are very vast. There's a whole array of topics, and one could definitely devote a whole talk or many talks to discussing, especially the Majalis-e Jahangiri. But I'm going to give just a few examples. And in particular, I have one extract from Abdul Sattar's account that sheds light on the emperor's later dialogues with Chidrup. So Abdul Sattar recounts that this majlis took place on the night of an eclipse. And this is just kind of a rough translation that I've done of this account. So on that night, the emperor of faith in the world, of Dino Dunya, was sitting on the throne of good fortune and felicity. Troops of nobles, so he's likening all the people in the court to soldiers, to troops. Troops of nobles and ministers and intellectuals of every religion, donayone halkish, the Muslims, Christians, and Hindus, whom he refers to as Hindiyon, they stood all around the throne. All the philosophers, line by line, assembled in battle rows at the foot of the emperor's throne. According to the measure of each intellect, more or less, all scattering pearls, they conversed with each other. The conversation turned to the subtleties of nature, mathematics, and the stars. Each group, according to its own custom, in a manner suitable for that exalted assembly, submitted its position to the holiest one, which he assayed with his most perfect balance. So again, everyone is free to discuss. There's a certain turn that the conversation naturally takes. People talk, but there's the idea that it's the emperor who provides the kind of the harmony and the balance over here. Now the talk turned to the ritual ablution that the Hindu wise men perform at the time of the solar and lunar eclipses. Some of the Muslims present extended their tongue towards reproach and submitted, and this is a kind of a colorful metaphor, that these people had decorated their shops for themselves, and that this practice of ablution had no benefit and was without a reason. The wise emperor pronounced that Muslims too offer prayer and supplication, namaz or niyaz at this time. It occurred thus to the mind of the seer of the angelic realm that regarding the group performing ablution, one might say that their aim was really an occasion of lesson for commoners and the elite. And likewise, at the time of prayer and supplication, at the time of namaz, it's better for people to be cleansed or pak, because cleansing off the spiritual and the bodily, the ruhani and jismani pollution is one of the conditions for prayer. Hearing these words, which revealed spiritual secrets, all having newly employed their tongues in prayer and praised, placed their heads on the ground. So in this exchange, we see that there is some criticism that comes up, a criticism of Hindu practices, and Jahangir rebuts them, and his rebuttal is then accepted by the group. So Jahangir does not merely liken these Hindu practices of ablution during an eclipse with the Islamic ablutions for offering namaz. Rather, he delves into the deeper meaning of the two practices. He finds that beneath the surface level differences, both practices have the same goal of cleansing and purification. He establishes spiritual and bodily cleansing as a common goal achieved in different manners by the two religious traditions under discussion. So Jahangir is thus able to act as a balancing force and harmonizer who soothes the interreligious disputes arising in his realm. Now, Mutrabi Samarkandi's brief text offers a unique insight into the author's 24 meetings with the emperor before he was granted leave to return to Samarkand. His portrayal of Jahangir shows the emperor to be curious and engaged in building a rapport with his visitors. On one occasion, Jahangir is fascinated by a pencil, and he shows Samarkandi a little notebook on which one could write with a pencil and then magically erase the writing. And then he gifts this book and pencil to Samarkandi, who is just amazed, and he treats it like a talisman or a wonder, like an ajaib of the age. On another occasion, Jahangir was very interested in Samarkandi's opinion on the accuracy of portraits that had been painted of Abdullah Khan Uzbek and his son Abdul Momin Khan, who were the rulers of Bukhara formerly. And Samarkandi made some criticisms. He said that, criticism about, their color of the complexion and so on, that it's too kind of dark with sabs and so on. And Jahangir took these criticisms into account and had his painters correct the portraits. Jahangir also inquired about the correct spelling of Samarkand, asking if it should be spelled with a kaf or with a qaf. When Samarkandi said that either spelling was fine, Jahangir approved. Now, both Abdul Sattar Lahori and Mutrabi Samarkandi indirectly evoke another motif of rulership with Mughal and Persianate precedents. This is the paradigm of the ruler presiding over a conversation or a debate with philosophers and religious figures. So the image, so we can see the image of the emperor seated amidst a circle of religious scholars of varying persuasions. And I'm just going to show you this one first. So there's this famous depiction of Akbar presiding over his Ibadat Khana, and we can see that there's some Jesuits also present, and he's presiding over this interreligious discourse. So both the Majalis-e Jahangiri as well as Matrabi Samarkandi's memoirs, they invoke this type of atmosphere, and this itself recalls again, Iskandar or Alexander, who's holding council with 7 philosophers. And this is a detail from the Khamsi of Nizami that was actually produced for Akbar. And so you can see that portrait here. Okay. Now, I could also kind of go on and talk about the European visitors and their meetings with Jahangir but I'm actually going to sort of make this section very brief in the interests of time. But around the time when the Jahangir was holding frequent encounters with Chitrup, he also hosted Sir Thomas Roe to his court, and the traveler kind of Tom Coriat also visited his court and had an audience with him. And these accounts, though, are especially Sir Thomas Roe, fairly well known, and they've been treated by me in my book, and of course by several other scholars. Before I conclude, I'd be remiss not to bring up Nur Jahan in this talk about Jahangir's dialogues and assemblies. Jahangir's conversation partners were not just limited to the notable men attending his court. His wife Nur Jahan was for him a cherished interlocutor and friend. Nur Jahan had a far more public role in his court than did many other Mughal women of the imperial household. Indeed, as Rubilal argues, she is most properly understood as his co-ruler. The poet Qawmi Shirazi, who was in Nur Jahan's employ, writes that Jahangir called her his partner in rule. Quote, "You and I are partners in kingship," end quote. "Ke hasti tu sharik man bishahi," is what he says. So moreover, unlike some other Mughal women, portraits of Nur Jahan do seem to exist. Now, it's often hard to know whether a painting of a Mughal woman is just an idealized representation or meant to be a portrait of a specific woman. These two paintings do seem to represent Nur Jahan. So in this one, Jahangir is shown seated in the half lotus pose, and he's wearing a loincloth, which is quite unusual for a Mughal emperor to be depicted this way. And he holds a wine cup, and Nur Jahan holds the pitcher. And in this next painting, this is a scene of a garden gathering, and we see Nur Jahan on the left, and Jahangir and his third son, Khurram, on the right. And they're surrounded by a large number of female attendants. Now, Jahangir and Nur Jahan are the central figures, and you can see Khurram, he's kind of slightly lower and a little more marginal to the scene. And here too, Jahangir is holding a wine cup. And the wine no doubt reflects Jahangir's actual fondness for alcohol, but we must also keep in mind in both these paintings, as Mira Khare has also pointed out, the wine cup in Mughal painting of this period carries mystical resonances and is also a symbol of universal kingship. And in fact, we do have poetry, which I don't have time to go into, on the side that also evokes these ideas of kingship. And again, it's interesting that Nur Jahan is chosen for the central spot of sitting with the emperor in both of these paintings. So in conclusion, I'd like to reflect on what we may briefly on what we may learn from Jahangir's dialogues, conversations, and assemblies with diverse figures. I must first underscore, though, that these texts and images that I've discussed here are idealized representations of Jahangir, which themselves invoke a whole range of other ideas and symbols. And you can see, we haven't even exhausted the range of their meanings and allusions. But the lessons that we can draw from these are not necessarily linked to our evaluation of Jahangir himself. So when discussing these motifs of dialogue and assembly in Jahangir's court, I'm also stepping back from making broad claims about Jahangir's character and deeds. Now, the examples I've discussed, and many others that I haven't been able to cover, discuss very positive aspects of the emperor. And, another very interesting discussion is the accounts that he had, the discussions that he had with the Jain monk Siddhi Chandra. And we actually don't have it from the Persian or the Mughal side. We have Siddhi Chandra's own account. And this is not completely a harmonious relationship, but it is resolved at the end. But however, Jahangir was by no means perfect. While he was capable of great insight, generosity, and hospitality, like many other rulers of his age, he also dealt ruthlessly with those who appeared as threats. So for instance, he ordered the execution of the Sikh Guru, Guru Arjan, and the great Shia intellectual Qazi Nurullah Shushtari. But nevertheless, we don't have to glorify Jahangir for us to be inspired by the stunning cultural products of his reign. And it's also good to keep in mind that the same text and image can take on a new meaning in a different context. So for instance, from the 17th century onwards, many works that were produced at the Mughal court on Indic religions, for instance, the Jog Bashist or other such works, they circulated widely in Persian. So they were once made to bolster a ruler's authority, but they all had lives outside the court, many of them did. In the hands of their later readers, whether they were Kayas Munshis, Khatri accountants, Iranian travelers, or just various Sufi scholars, they acquired a fresh significance. So these readers too were interested in the questions that preoccupied Mughal rulers. And these are fundamental questions about the place of human beings in the world. For instance, what does it mean to be liberated? What is the nature of reality? How can we achieve liberation while we are still entrapped in the material world? How do we know the self so as to know the divine? Now, these were preoccupations of many. So these works spoke to not only their own context of production, but they had lives after that. So in a similar manner, Jahangir's dialogues, assemblies, conversations with such a variegated cast of individuals also elicit questions for our own times. And these are just a few examples. How can we in our present world coexist in a multi-religious society? Just as all these travelers went to Jahangir's court, how do we also embrace the movement of people, whether travelers or migrants? How can we and our leaders seek wisdom, be ready to listen, learn, and take suggestions? What are our conceptions of justice, social justice, resolutions to conflict? How do we achieve ecological balance? And how do we seek out dialogue and conversation within our own societies? There are no easy answers to these questions, but delving into our own histories may give us a new perspective on them. And with that, I end. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gandhi, for a brilliant lecture. It's not only thought-provoking, it's extremely relevant to our times. And with that, I invite Dr. T.C.A. Raghavan, Director General, Indian Council of World Affairs, to share his thoughts on the lecture.
Thank you very much. And may I first congratulate the Syed Amir Hassan Abidi Memorial Society for organizing this lecture and also for constructing this wonderful platform whereby we recall his life and work. So I'm very grateful to you, Rana Safvi, to Professor Chandrasekhar, and I'm delighted to be able to participate to hear Supriya Gandhi's wonderful lecture along with Dr. Muhammad Ali Rabbani, Dr. Khwaja Piri, and of course with Shahid Mehdi Saab and SBF Hussaini Saab. It was a wonderful lecture, so congratulations, Dr. Gandhi. You enabled us to reflect deeply on the Mughals, and certain thoughts, of course, come to me. The most important of which is that every generation asks new questions of the historical evidence. And because we ask different questions from the sources, history in many ways has to be refashioned. And certainly, this refashioning of history is inevitable, and it is good that we ask new questions and we discover new evidence. But I think we also have to be on our guard against overloading history with our present day perspectives and our present day concerns. To some extent, it is inevitable because the questions we ask are informed by the present. But I was reminded of this need for caution when I was reading your wonderful book on Dara Shikoh, and I read about his text, Majmu al-Bahrain, and it reminded me of Prime Minister Abe when he visited India in 2007, and in an address to the parliament, spoke about the need for the strategic requirement for the Indian and the Pacific Oceans. This is the antecedent, the first antecedent really of the current discourse on the Indo-Pacific, which is a very important geopolitical development taking place in our times. And then somewhat curiously, he referred to this Mughal prince who had spoken about the unity of the two seas. So you have Majmu al-Bahrain, which is a text in a totally different environment and in a totally different context being used to talk about the shifting geopolitics of the 21st century. So I think that it is a certain amount of caution in stepping back when we ask, when we look at the historical record is always very useful. And it's good to remind those of us about this who are not experts and who are not scholars, but are the interested lay public who enjoy reading history and are delighted with the many accomplishments of the Mughals, but also take interest in their many tragic flaws and their numerous other aspects of their lives. And really, your lecture reminded us about how great was the interest of the Mughals in the different faiths and in the different cultures they interfaced with in India, and how deep was the quality of the dialogue they carried out. And one can call it an interfaith dialogue, but there was also a great deal of intellectual curiosity which informed this dialogue. So I think that aspect of the Mughals is very important, this intellectual quest and this trying to understand the social and intellectual environment around them. But this cosmos coexisted, as you suggested also towards the end, with another cosmos, which is of courtly intrigues, military expansion, and finally, in the case of each of the great Mughals, jostling for succession, which brought so much ruin upon the empire and led to the extinction of so many otherwise brilliant scholars, one of whom I studied, Abdur Rahim Khan-e-Khanan. And so these two separate cosmoses coexisted. And I think our understanding of the Mughals, at least the lay person's understanding of the Mughals, is greatly enhanced when we integrate these two cosmoses together, because then the Mughals become real life flesh and blood figures, not ideal types, but persons with great accomplishments, great individual characters and personalities, but also with flaws, who had to exercise very difficult errors, difficult choices, make very difficult judgment calls, which were often wrong and tragically wrong, as they and their followers discovered from time to time, especially during the numerous wars of succession. So these thoughts come to me. The other thought which I thought I must share is how important it is for platforms such as the Professor Abidi Memorial Society to continue this kind of activity, because, as I said, there is a need to bring the scholarly universe and the academic universe closer to the lay public, to the interested but non-scholarly audience. And I do think lectures such as this serve that purpose. So I would like to congratulate all the organizers, and I would especially like to thank Mehdi Saab for inviting me to join this lecture today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I would now like to invite Dr. Muhammad Ali Rabbani, the Cultural Counselor, Iran Culture House, New Delhi, to come and share his thoughts with us.
لطفاً انمیوت کنید آقای دکتر.
صدا میاد؟ صدا میاد الان؟
جی وعلیکم السلام.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everyone. I extend my cordial greeting to all the scholars and best regard to the all participants, and many thanks to the organizer of this webinar, Professor Abidi Memorial Association. First of all, I offer my respect and credit the memory of Professor Abidi, and I hope that valuable and useful discussion will be presented in this program. Let me take a few minutes and share my idea about the Professor Abidi in Persian language, because you know the main characteristic of the Professor Abidi was as a Persian professor and he loved Farsi. خب خیلی ممنونیم از همه دوستانی که در این شرایط کرونا این فرصت رو فراهم آوردن که یاد و خاطر یکی از شخصیت‌ها و اساتید برجسته زبان فارسی رو گرامی بدارن. یه بحثی هم در ایران و هم در هند مطرح است که آیا زبان فارسی در هند زنده است یا در حال احتضاره و در حال فراموش شدنه. من معتقدم به دلایلی زبان فارسی هنوز در هند و شبه قاره زنده است و حیات داره. دلیل عمده‌اش اینه که یکی از بنیان‌های اساسی و پایدار روابط چند هزار ساله بین مردم ایران و هند زبان و ادب فارسی و همچنین شعرا و عرفای برجسته‌ای بودند که در طول تاریخ نقش اساسی و اولیه‌ای رو داشتن در برقراری و توسعه ارتباطات بین مردم ایران و هند. نکته دیگر این که زبان فارسی با ویژگی‌های فرهنگی، تنوع دینی و قومی در هند و توجهی که جامعه هند به معناگرایی، عرفان و تصوف داشته تناسب ویژه‌ای داشته. و نکته دیگر این که فارسی در شبه قاره دارای یک ساختار ادبی است و طبیعتاً هم بنابر تأییدی که بعضی از اساتید زبان فارسی هم میکنن این که دارای سبک در اینجا و یک هویت مستقلی داره و اینطور نیست که با فراز و فرودهایی که در ارتباطات سیاسی بین ایران و هند اتفاق میفته زبان فارسی بخواد از بین بره، به دلیل اینکه یک پیوند مستحکمی داره. زبان فارسی در هند دارای سبک خاص خودشه، سبک هندی ساختار ادبیاتی داره و شعرهای برجسته مثل بیدل، امیر خسرو و صدها شاعر دیگه داره که اینها متعلق به سرزمین هنده و هرچند در دوره معاصر بحث زبان فارسی افول کرده، ولی ما هنوز بنده معتقدم که به دلیل وجود منابع فراوانی که از زبان فارسی هنوز وجود داره و این محل مراجعه جامعه هند هست و هنوز ما شخصیت‌های برجسته ادبی و شاعرای برجسته داریم از جمله مرحوم پروفسور عابدی که اینها به تداوم حیات زبان فارسی سهم عمده‌ای رو بر عهده داشتن و زبان فارسی رو به هر حال در شبه قاره هند تونستن این فضا و فضای استمرارش رو فراهم بکنن. طبیعتاً به یقین در توسعه و ترویج زبان فارسی در دوره معاصر مرحوم پروفسور عابدی رو با جزو نفرات اول و برجسته‌ای دونست که سهم و نقش موندگاری رو در حیات زبان فارسی در دوره معاصر هند بر عهده داشته و طبیعتاً زبان فارسی که محمل و بستر خوبیه برای تغزل، ابراز عشق، محبت و حکمت و معرفت، ادامه حیاتش رو مدیون تلاش‌های بیشابه اساتید بزرگی مثل مرحوم پروفسور عابدیه. این شکوه و عظمت و شور نشاطی که زبان فارسی در گذشته هند داشته طبیعتاً با وجود بزرگانی مثل مرحوم پروفسور عابدی این حیات ادامه داره و امروز قطعاً همه ما میراثدار این میراث گرانبهای معنوی بزرگی هستیم که فصل مشترک جامعه هند و ایرانه. خیلی ممنون و تشکر میکنیم از زحماتی که دوستان کشیدن. یقینا زحمات پروفسور عابدی در طی عمر پربرکت 90 ساله خودشون که هم در حوزه ترجمه و هم نوشتار و تدریس زبان فارسی سهم بزرگی داشتن، آثار پربرکت و ارزشمندی از خودشون بر جای گذاشتن مثل گلزار حال، مثنویات فانی کشمیری، سوز و گداز، منتخب اللطایف، تاریخ سلاطین صفویه، احوال و آثار کریم کاشانی، بحث تصوف در هند و دهها آثار و همچنین بیش از 250 مقاله‌ای که در زمینه‌های مختلف زبان فارسی در مجلات و نشریات داخل و خارج داشتن و همچنین در سمینارها و کنفرانس‌های متعددی که داشتن. طبیعتاً ایشون رو به یک چهره ماندگار در گسترش و توسعه زبان فارسی میشه ازش یاد کرد. امیدوارم که مسیری که پرتلاش که ایشون پیمودن ادامه پیدا بکنه توسط اساتید برجسته‌ای که امروز ما در خدمتشون هستیم و که انصافاً عاشق ادبیات فارسی هستند و من معتقدم که زبان فارسی هرگز از جامعه هند محو نخواهد شد به دلیلی که بخشی از تاریخ، بخشی از فرهنگ جامعه هند مربوط به زبان فارسی است و امیدواریم که این همچون گذشته یک مسیری باشه برای توسعه ارتباطات و پیوندهای فرهنگی و تاریخی دو ملت بزرگ ایران و هند. السلام علیکم و رحمت الله. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rabbani. I now invite Mr. Shahid Mehdi, who is the president of the Professor Amir Hassan Abidi Memorial Society, to say a few words and share his thoughts. Mamu, mute पर हैं आप.
Okay, is it okay?
जी, now we can hear you.
Now it's okay. Yeah. See, I'm rather new to this technology. Well, first of all, I would like to congratulate Suhail because he has been consistently organizing this lecture. And this is the 5th lecture. In spite of all the corona problems and all these things, I think we very interesting evening. And my compliments to Professor Supriya Gandhi. It was a very interesting topic, and her mastery of the original sources is really enviable. I don't know what is happening because I can see only my see. So the topic is so interesting that I was just going through the Tuzak of Jahangir, and he mentioned group, and he says Jadrup se dobara mulaqat and Jadrup se mulaqat, etc. I've got Urdu translation of his Tuzak. Now, what is interesting is that he had no ego in visiting Jadru. And in an entry of 1619, he says, पीर के दिन फिर मेरी गोसाई जदरूप की मुलाकात के लिए तबीयत बहुत मायल हुई और बेतकल्लुफ मैं उसकी क़यामगाह पर गया. And imagine an emperor, see, going to Gosai. That shows the kind of broad vision and interest. I mean, we don't associate these things with Jahangir, but when you read his Tulak, then this aspect of his personality also is illuminated. Anyhow, let me just also express as president of the society, my thanks to Professor Supriya Gandhi. I've been just reading her book on Darashiko, and I think this is the most comprehensive treatment of the subject on this, because I should thank Mr. Raghavan, was so kind to respond to my request, and I've just finished reading his very interesting narrative history of Khan Khana and Baram Khan, you see. I don't know how they are able to marshal so many facts and so many things. So my compliments to him, and I hope that this definitive work on Baram Khan and Khan Khana, because Khan Khana we know only mostly as a poet, most of the people, but all his dimensions are there in that book. Now, Bilqis, of course, has been working behind the scene all the time, and she has been editing a lot of scattered papers of Mir Bhai, and I think she deserves this compliment for her consistent thing. Chandrasekhar, I mean, he's still keeping the old tradition of Ustad and Shagird, etc. Or I think he's a person like him are rare these days, because you see, this Guru Shishya Parampara, he is continuing with that. So, and Janab Rabbani, I think since we have come, the cultural activities have been further boosted by this by Iran Culture House. So these are the few words which I wanted to basically express my appreciation for all those who have made this continuity of this lecture possible. I hope that we'll be able to collect the previous lectures, and we'll be able to leave some kind of a durable record in the form of a collection of these various lectures, because most of the time the topics have been very, very interesting. And I should compliment Suhail for getting the cooperation of such eminent scholars on such innovative subjects. And finally, Rana, thank you so much for conducting this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. I would now like to invite Professor Akhlaq Khan to offer a vote of thanks and conclude the session today.
Thanks. What a wonderful talk, Dr. Supriya Gandhi. And it was really incisive and a great delight to hear you. In the 5th Professor Abidi Memorial Lecture, and the way you presented the whole thing, the syncretic tradition we have. Generally, whenever we talk about Jahangir, the impression comes that he was a happy-go-lucky kind of person. But the kind of reverence he had for the Sufis, saints, and the way he has described it in his Tuzak, and the same thing is also mentioned by Dara Shukwa in his Sakinatul Awliya, that how he had relations with Miyamir and others. So it was really a wonderful talk. Uh, I thank on behalf of Professor Amir S.A.H.Abidi Memorial, and I would also like to thank our guest, Mr. T.C.A. Raghavan, who kindly consented to grace this occasion. And तशक्कुर از آقای دکتر محمد علی ربانی که ایشون هم تشریف آوردن و حضور داشتن. بسیار تشکر از شما آقای دکتر. I would also like to thank Suhail Saab, who has been, and as S.A.H.Abidi Saab mentioned, and Rana Safri Sahiba, Professor Chandrasekhar Saab, and S.A.H.Abidi Saab has been always a source of inspiration for all of us, not only on this forum, but everywhere in Delhi. So he has been always inspiring for all of us. So thank you, sir. And thanks to everybody who participated and was part of this talk. And we would like to see more and more programs on this forum. I would like to end with one qata by Chandrabhan Rahman, that kuwan shabe ghaflat ke ghanudim beham an raz ke guftim o shanidim beham aya bod an ke baz bashim shabi yek bar digar chunke budim beham. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody who has attended, and a special thank to Professor Supriya Gandhi for taking out the time of a very, very busy schedule. I know how busy she is, to give us this fascinating lecture. And there will be a series of lectures on 26th and 27th of February to celebrate the birth anniversary of Professor Abidi, as Bilqis Bhabhi has already mentioned. So hope to see all of you there. We are going to have some very fascinating papers from all over the world, and we shall be celebrating. And this itself, I just keep thinking of Daddy and thinking that had he been alive today, he would have taken to this medium, very automatically, because we were so curious, and he had such a lot of childlike curiosity to learn new things and to explore. So I'm sure he would have loved the medium of Zoom. So thank you everybody, and good night. Take care.
Thank you. It was a pleasure and an honor to be part of this occasion.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone.